Let's get right into squat technique. I know I've kicked deadlifts into the ground to dead horse. It warranted a ton of discussion, which is why I've made videos and blog posts and even a book, Superior Deadlift, available on Amazon. But I'm currently in the process of making Superior Squat, so it got me thinking quite a bit about the similar principles that go into finding your perfect squat technique. And squatting is actually unique because I think there are a lot more variations that might work for a potential person. So there's a bit more wiggle room. And that can actually make things harder because you can progress consistently and still have that paralysis that makes you wonder, is this what I should be doing? Should I go back to the drawing board? Things are going so good. Do I need to sabotage all my progress and go completely retool the way I set up in this very simple biomechanically friendly lift? So that's actually something we're going to cover. But let's get started. Finding the optimal competitive setup. That is the agenda for today. So let's go over the main factors that influence your squat setup. So then we can pick apart which ones we need to focus on and which ones we just kind of have to accept because we can't do anything about. Limb ratios is a big one, and that's similar with deads. Height, many people think it's height or that height plays a role. It really doesn't. The thing is, the bigger your frame is, the more muscle you can hold, and that tends to lend itself to bigger lifts regardless. Yeah, body weight ratio isn't going to be as good, but who the hell cares? The important thing is leverages, and that's going to be where your joints line up relative to each other. And that's determined by the length of the moment arm, which is determined by how long your limbs are. So you have to look at relative lengths. So that's like your femur relative to your height, your torso relative to your height. Your shin is one that is, I think, much more important in squatting than it is in deadlifts. Your shin length can actually make quite a bit of difference in how upright you can get with a particular stance, given that you have, let's say, long legs or a long torso. So all of these things play a role. Obviously, it's not trainable. You can't change your limb ratios. At least medical science isn't there yet. What we can do is be aware of how we're built so that we can try to work into that. Being aware there's some cues that we might be able to follow, and that can make our life a little bit easier. At the very least, it can help us troubleshoot if something tends to present a problem. Relative strengths and weaknesses. This is really developmentally how you've grown so far. Bracers versus movers. That's a big one. Deadlifts, just the same. Anything that relies on bearing a load through your torso is going to require some amount of bracing capacity. So your midsection, your obliques, your upper back, all of the musculature that supports your spine and keeps it rigid has to be strong. And if it's not, it can present a weak point. If it's disproportionately strong, you might also find yourself getting away with certain things that other lifters can't. And of course, your goal is to be as well-rounded as possible, to be as efficient as possible. So we do want to concern ourselves with smoothing over these glaring weaknesses. But it's very important to know what those muscles are doing and how they support you and how that is different from the actual movers. Those are the things that move you at the knee and hip joint. And that is generally what we think of when we think of developing the musculature that contributes to a squat. Quads are another one, how strong your quads are to your posterior chain. If, let's say, you come from a bodybuilding background, or let's say you're the 1 in 10,000 people that just loves to train your quads, not bicep, not pecs, you train your quads, just sled drags and leg extensions all day. Well, if you're very quad dominant or if your quads are disproportionately strong to your posterior, and that actually is a problem with a lot of high bar squatters, CrossFitters, Olympic lifters will encounter that. That's going to give you a different skill set or let you get away with different things than somebody who has a very strong posterior. In strongman, I work with and see a lot of people with extremely strong posteriors because they're huge deadlifters. They're like, yeah, I weigh 175 and I pull like 700 pounds, but I can't squat my way out of a paper bag. That difference in strength is going to make it easier and harder to ease into different setups. So it becomes a different game. So being aware of that is important. Mobility, ankles, hips, shoulders. Shoulders are going to dictate where the bar goes. If you have tight shoulders, you might not be able to get in real tight, that real tight crammed in low bar squat where your AC joint ends up popping because of all the tension. That's where guys end up throwing their hands over the side of the plates or the top of the plates. They can't get their thumbs around the bar. There's an interesting story I heard about Kazmaier not being able to get his hands on the bar at a powerlifting meet because he was so tight through his pecs and shoulders. And the solution ended up using a certain drug that may or may not be illegal. I won't go into depth in that. But hey, you got to get in where you fit in. Hips. If your hips are really tight, like so many of us have, sitting all day like I'm doing right now, or even just getting bound as you get bigger and more muscular over time, you're going to find that your idea of depth changes or that it might be harder to get into certain positions. So tight hips will limit depth. Ankles will prevent your knees from going forward. That's probably the biggest one. Pro tip, if you think ankle mobility is an issue or you have issues with getting your knees forward without feeling destabilized, throw a pair of 2.5 pound plates under your heels. See if it fixes anything. See if it feels better. If you're brand new, you don't need to go out and buy $200 Olympic lifting shoes. You don't need special shoes. You can just put a thin piece of board or a 2.5 pound plate under your heels and it's fine. If it feels better, then yes, Olympic lifting shoes might be the way to go in the future. But that's one of the first things I troubleshoot when I'm trying to figure out somebody's technique, because poor ankle mobility is universally a problem. Just a lot of people have that issue. So that's going to influence your best setup. You're not very well going to be able to do a very high bar squat with your knees just shoving straight forward if your ankles are limiting your ability to get into position at the bottom. Experience, it's a big one. Active versus sedentary people, people who are very physical, who played sports, who are recreationally active and not just testing their 1 rep max a few times a week. I mean, actually getting their heart rate up, moving around, testing their body. Experienced people will have a lot more tools in their kit than sedentary people. And it's one of the reasons that general athleticism is so important in this field. And it's something that I really look for when I'm trying to work with people. Those who have athletic backgrounds or generally active backgrounds just do a lot better. If you're sedentary, hope is not lost. You're just going to have to be aware of these limitations. There's going to be a lot more base building. I always say going through driver's ed for your body, which a lot of us flunked out of or didn't even show up to. So that's different. Your previous athletic experience, different skill positions might have had you in different positions that may or may not transfer over to squatting. And ultimately, you get good at how you train. So that's where experience comes in as well, because you may think that something isn't ideal, or you may evaluate somebody based on what you think should work best for them. And lo and behold, you find out that the experience of doing that for so long led to this long adaptive process that actually makes them better at that than anything else, even though maybe they shouldn't be. Sumo deadlifting is a great example. The difference between sumo and conventional. Mechanically, sumo is more advantage for everybody, but you get good at how you train. So if all you've ever done is a conventional deadlift, that's going to be your sweet spot. That's going to be where all the coordination is, where all the adaptations take place. So mechanics are only part of it. You do definitely get good at how you train, and that is going to influence where your best squat setup is going to be. So it's not just mechanics. That's important to know. Goals. The thing that you want to do is going to have a heavy influence on how we set you up. Let's say it's purely developmental. If we just want to grow for the sake of growing, well, you're probably not watching this because this is more towards competitiveness. But for those of you that happen to be really oriented towards just having big, meaty legs, or maybe you are a lifter, you're in the off season and you want to forget about your technical setup and you just want to grow some big ham hocks. In that case, you may throw your technical squat setup out the window. You may do different things to elicit more muscle growth. That's what bodybuilders do. When you see bodybuilders doing all kinds of weird shit that competitive lifters might see as absolute heresy, and we point and laugh and make fun at them. But at the end of the day, they're the ones that can grow and grow and grow without needing, a long-winded, overly convoluted spreadsheet to fill out all of their training for the week. So I don't know who's really laughing in that scenario. But developmental work might include limited range of motion, or it might include not really worrying about going to parallel, or it might concern itself with going way below parallel. You might go unnecessarily narrow to where you feel really disadvantaged, where you couldn't possibly be that strong, but that might be great for building a big set of wheels. Also for weak point targeting, we keep that in mind because we do want to round out weaknesses. So we don't just do exactly the same thing every time. Mostly we don't. There are programs that exist like that, but unless you're working under the Russian government or unless you're a state-sponsored athlete, I don't recommend doing that. Your livelihood doesn't depend on it, so you might as well not do something that is so monotonous it makes you want to jump out a window. If you're competitive, then you have to figure out competitive in what. I mean, an athlete might train differently than a strongman versus an actual powerlifter. Are you competing in reps like strongmen have to? That's going to be a different setup potentially than the way you might do a 1-rep max or train specifically just for a 1-rep max. If you are an athlete, you need to concern yourself with carryover. Is one particular squat style going to do more or less for your setup? So those are things to take into account. Now, the good old bell curve, for those of you that slept through statistics class, this is universal in just about anything we can measure against a population. Many of you are going to immediately start picking apart your mechanics, and you're likely to think that you're either going to have long legs or short legs, or that you're going to have wide hips or narrow hips, or that your sockets are going to point forward or out to the side. Most of you don't have these issues. Most of you are pretty even. Most of you are likely to not have a dramatic feature one way or another. So don't assume that because we're covering these extremes that they apply to you or that you have to take these cues into account. It's possible that one or two of them might be an issue for you, but it's not likely, so don't assume that's the case. The normal distribution curve just shows that most people are going to be in kind of this middle bubble, and then as you get out, you get fewer and fewer and fewer people that are at the extremes. So having very, very lopsided builds, that's at the extremes. So it probably doesn't concern you. So be okay with the idea that maybe you're just built pretty even, in which case you have a lot of play in the joints. You can get away with a lot of things. It's not a bad thing. So step one, this is going to be our step-by-step process for figuring out exactly how to find your stance. If you're brand new, this is great starting from scratch. If you're not, this might help you retool some things if you've really been struggling recently with your chosen setup. So you want to rule out unique circumstances. So we just talked about how you're probably not in one of the extremes, but you want to rule that out as a possibility. So hip shape is a big one. You can't train for that. Those who have hip sockets that point forward, those are going to be your guys whose knees point forward, even if they have long legs. God help you if you're cursed with forward pointing hip sockets and long legs because you're going to be limited on your ability to get them out to the side. It's a big pain in the ass. And those tend to be the types of lifters who you see pitch way forward, almost where it's awkward or uncomfortable. God, I'm trying to think of his name. PH Deadlift. Is that Ben Polak? I got to look into that. I should have researched this. I shouldn't name drop until I research. But there are a couple examples of people that have a narrow stance and pitch forward. I think Marissa Inda does that as well. Chad Smith is Boo. So hip shape is something you can't train around. Or sorry, you can't train for. You can't train to change it. You can train around it. You can set yourself up to better accommodate it. And similarly, guys who have sockets that point way out to the side, those are the ones that can do a stupid wide stance west side sumo squat and still get their ass to grass. That's also a very rare build. So do some testing in front of the mirror. Don't be naked. Somebody might walk in. Trust me, you don't want to be practicing your squat setup naked in front of a mirror when somebody walks in. It's not a good look. Don't ask me how I know that. Limb ratios we covered. Again, if you have very long legs relative to your height, that means your torso is going to be short. So if your belt touches both your ribs and your hip bone, that's a good sign that you have a short torso. You might have an absolutely short torso. You might just be short. But if you're of average height and that's the case, you probably have long legs. If you squat down and your knees are way in front of your shoulders, or if you're in a leg press and your knees end up going way back by your ears, long legs. Similarly, if the opposite is true, if your knees just barely end up getting to the midline of your chest, that's my case. That means you have a longer torso proportionate to your legs. And shorter legs, again, different things you can get away with might present different problems. Mobility issues, which we covered, other abnormalities. If you're watching this trying to figure out how to squat better, but you had a surgery to fuse a bunch of your vertebra, or if you have an injury where now you have a club leg. I mean, it goes without saying, but you would be surprised the questions I get. Rule out the unique stuff before you start moving forward with the rest of this, because again, I'm casting a wide net here. So not everything is going to apply exactly to you, and it's up to you to know what unique circumstances might make the rules a little bit different. Step 2 is to start medium everything. Okay, we started with the bell curve. Most of you are under the middle when it comes to everything we went over. So it makes sense to start in a medium spot that most people can accommodate anyways. I mean, typically the people at the extremes can still do a medium-ish setup. So you're talking about a medium stance. Feet somewhere under your shoulders is about medium. Not really inside, not too far outside, just about medium. Maybe a jumping stance and just like an inch or two out to the side. That tends to be where a lot of people squat at their strongest. Medium bar position. And bar position is the most overblown thing in the world. I actually hate referring to squatting as high bar or low bar because they're associated with different stances, but you can do any stance with any bar position. Bar position is where it's comfortable. But don't start with the bar really high up on your traps because your favorite Olympic lifter does it. And don't put the bar halfway down your torso because you want to optimize powerlifting leverages for all of the powerlifting meat gains. Medium, get it on your rear delts. Just make sure there's some nice padding there. It's secure, but you can still stay kind of upright. Moderately upright, that's another medium point. If you're extremely, extraordinarily upright, like the Olympic lifters we just talked about, your knees are going to go way forward regardless of your build, and that's a very specialized setup. It's not likely that that's going to be where you are the strongest. It might be, but it's not likely. Also, way pitched over, way good morning, ass back behind you, bars rolling up your neck because you're just getting deeper and deeper. Probably not your best setup. So aim to have a somewhat middle ground upright position and a slight wedge. You'll notice a theme with most lifters. Knees are coming out, they're wedging into the bar. And there's some cues to help with that. Some people just push their knees out to the side. Some people will kind of laterally push the ground apart down in a way. Others will try to torque their feet into the ground like they're trying to twist open 2 jars of peanut butter. And one's going clockwise, one's going counterclockwise. That'll get your glutes engaged and help you wedge. Just try to be aware of that tension that gets built up and how it creates a space for your butt to drop in. Or you can go Ed Cohen's cue, which is a perennial favorite. Spread the taint. It all works. It all does the same thing. Now, this is the big one with starting out medium. Use your hips and knees evenly. So if your butt's coming way, way back, your shins are vertical, that's a hip dominant squat. That's an extreme. That means your posterior is going to be doing most of the heavy lifting. You're going to notice it's a little harder to get depth and you might have a lot more mechanical support. Probably going to have to pitch forward a little bit more. Similarly, if you're staying very, very upright and the knees are shooting way forward, your butt's directly underneath you. Very knee and quad dominant. All right, so to start out a medium stance, have some sense of what your knees and hips are doing. Try to do your best to distribute the load evenly at the start. And this is just a baseline. This is just kind of a baseline, medium, middle of the road squat that should work for most people. And we're going to make steps as we go to change as you need to change. Step 3 is going to be identifying deficiencies as you do this stance. And I recommend doing it first with a goblet squat. It's one of the easiest ways to practice. Again, in front of a mirror, not naked. Hold a kettlebell in front of you and practice this setup. Medium stance, medium lean, slight wedge. Try to identify where it feels difficult. If you get through a few reps and it feels okay, move to a barbell and then move to a little bit of weight. Don't get too heavy, 20, 30% of your max, just to figure out how your position looks, how it feels, and if you have a handle on it. Are you getting forced out of position? Does trying to do this medium setup put pressure in one area? You might feel pressure in your hips or glutes as you try to get low. You might feel pressure in your feet. Some of you might have tightness. It causes your feet to roll into the side. That brings everything in and destabilizes you. Do you feel like maintaining a medium setup like we just described is forcing you out of position? Like you're having to work against your body. Are you getting thrown off balance? Does doing this setup result in your weight shifting way, way forward or way back? Do you feel like you're going to fall over? Is there any pain? Hip pain, knee pain, foot and ankle? That's a sign that something's taking on too much stress or that you have some other weakness or issue that has to be addressed. Depth is a big one. more of the peculiar builds will often have a hard time hitting depth if they are in a setup that is counter to the way that they're built. Take somebody with daddy long legs and have them do a narrow stance and see how awkward it is for them to get lower. Similarly, you'll see some of the stubbier lifters, shorter limbed guys, if they go in a wide stance, especially with those hip sockets point forward, they're not going to be able to hit depth. There's just too much mechanical tension in there. So that's important to pay attention to. Are you weak or are you unstable at the bottom? Are you exposed? Does everything feel like loose, like everything's just about to fall out? Like all the stuff that should be in here is about to end up on the floor? That's a problem as well. And that will all give you insight on little tweaks you can make to try to get better depth, more security, more strength, which is what we're after. From here on, based on that information, you're going to troubleshoot, you're going to make small adjustments as needed. Your stance is probably the first one, inches at a time. Couple inches in, couple inches out, still doing the wedge, still aiming to stay kind of upright. Start with that and find where you feel the most comfortable. Look for that handle. And again, try plates. You'd be surprised. A lot of people, 2.5 pound plates under the heels makes a big difference. Little playing around with the stance. Find something that's good. Find something that feels even and secure. Stick with it. From there, you worry about hip position. Are your hips coming way, way back? Are they staying forward? Are they staying under you? Then worry about knee position. Are your knees coming way, way out? Are they staying in? Are they pointing forward? Try to pair these different cues together until you feel something that is very secure at the bottom. Remember, the bottom position is the most important part. If you're not strong there, you're not going to be strong through any of the lift. So that's what we worry about. Now, you also want to avoid focusing on useless cues. This is my pet peeve. And YouTube, blogs, forums, magazines, they're all filled with endless useless cues that, and unfortunately, there's a ton of them, and they just distract people. And you don't have a really good way in the beginning to know if it's good or bad. So that's why we're starting basic, easy stuff and then taking small steps forward as we go. The stuff to avoid: stop fucking around with where the bar is. We just went over that. You can do any stance squat with the bar anywhere you want. Bar is about comfort and position. If you're an Olympic lifter, sure, get it up on your traps, but you don't need it there unless that's where you're going. Similarly, you don't need the bar halfway down your back. Just get it on the meat of your rear delts and get a grip that is comfortable. Toe position, that's one that's overblown. Unless you have a huge problem with your feet rolling into the side, stop messing around with your toes. If your shin is stacked directly on your ankle as you squat, you're fine. Cues related to building tension, that's a lot of arbitrary stuff. It's stuff that just really depends on the lifter. You will find that out as you go. That doesn't have anything to do with finding your best setup. So stop messing around with exactly how tight your lats are getting or really overemphasizing the brace. It's important to know how to brace, but when you're doing sets of 10 and it's practice work, you're not going to be messing with your ribs and your hips and getting your hips tucked under. You're not going to be doing that every rep. You need to just learn how to be fluid and efficient first. And all the weird stuff with the knees, the elbows, the hands, doing this with your feet before you set up, all of those little rituals need to go away because they don't help you focus on what's important. Most efficient setup and where the hell is the handle at the bottom. That's what you need to focus on. Positioning comes first. All the other stuff comes in the subsequent years of squatting that you're going to do during all your work sets. Once you have an idea of that, you're going to prioritize skill work in your training. That means you're not just going as heavy as you can, because when you're in a new technique, even if it feels better with lighter weight, once you get heavy and start to grind, or once you experience a lot of fatigue, that form deteriorates. So you need to ingrain this in your head. And it could be entirely possible that there's some weak areas, some muscle imbalances like the ones we talked about that have to be rounded out before you get very efficient. And you're only going to do that by doing hundreds, if not thousands of reps in that exact particular setup. So lots of warm-ups, volume that isn't grinded or done in a fatigued state. Find the damn handle at the bottom. Find that point of purchase. Make it the same every time. Thank you for sticking around through yet another lecture. Consider visiting Base Strength forum. It's absolutely free. If you want more information, if you want to interact with our 900, not just members, guys, high quality members, okay? They have a lot of great information. They can interpret a lot of the stuff that I've written about in the past, which blows my mind. Great free resource if you guys want more information on stuff like this. consider visiting Patreon or YouTube for exclusive content. These videos come out there first. And again, if you want to support my work. And lastly, EmpireBarbellStore.com, merch, books. Books you should probably get from Amazon. They're just faster. Personalized programs, one-on-one mentorship. Sorry, I got excited there. We got the whole shebang there. Consider visiting us there. I appreciate everybody's support. Really, truly, I do. Please leave your comments in the comments section or on the Facebook forum. Until next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.